Robert McKee's story has been so influential to my life in terms of my storytelling, more specifically with screenwriting, but I utilize it for my novels as well. And because of that, I thought it'd be beneficial to highlight the big ideas of this book that McKee showcases. Now, of course, I don't want this ultimately to replace you going out and reading the book firsthand and obtaining the information within directly from the source. If anything, this is meant to inspire you to dive deeper into it by providing this overview. So the first big idea is that story is a craft. Writing isn't magic. It's a discipline that you do over time, and you, like with anything, get better and get better at over that time. Talent is nothing without technique, right? So when we talk about storytelling as a craft, many people can have raw talent, but without the right technique behind it, it amounts to nothing ultimately. And the mastery of this means deliberate and informed choices, right? When we talk about raw talent, oftentimes people are working on instinct and things like that. And that can get you started for sure. But in order to find true success, sustained success, you need to work to become a master. And you do that through discipline and technique. So that's point number one. Number two, structure is everything. The classic structure, the arc plot, has a cause and effect, external conflict, and closed endings. There are other structures like the mini plot, which has internal conflict and more open-ended endings. And then you have the anti-plot, which is non-linear, absurd, and the ending can be open, closed, or whatever else. The classic archetype that you can think of is, let's say, Casablanca, right? That's, has that beginning, middle, and end. It makes sense. It rounds out the story, and you leave feeling good for the most part. The mini plot structure, there are plenty of examples of that, but, let's take like Before Sunrise. That's a great movie from Richard Linklater that has kind of an internal conflict and an open-ended ending, and where you're left with that. Anti-plot, Fellini's 8.5 is a good example of this, right? And knowing this is, one, you have to know these things, because in order to break the rules, well, you should at least know the rules. So if you're going to go anti-plot, well, you should kind of know plotting in general of what is the classical sense, so that way you know what you're breaking. And also you have to kind of know that the further away you get from the classic structure, the less potential audience there is for those stories, right? So you just have to kind of give and take with it. Number three, the 5 keys to story beats. There's the inciting incident. So this is the moment when everything changes for the main character or multiple characters, right? It sets things in motion. Now, it doesn't necessarily imply the act 1 break, but it does, the inciting incident can literally start at the top of it, or it can start closer to the act 1 break, which is about generally about 30 minutes into a movie. Progressive complications. This is the bulk of your story, right? And a character takes an action, it either succeeds but doesn't go quite the way they want, or it fails and then they have to take another action, right? So these are things that are driving them further and further towards what they want, with each step escalating in terms of what they have to do. We call generally this like the bulk of Act 2, right? Act 2 is what ultimately ends up being the longest in terms of a story. And so you have to, have this really be engaging, okay? Then there's the crisis. This is where the character has to make the toughest decision yet. Lesser of two evils, irreconcilable goods, things of that nature, maybe even both combined. And then we have the climax, which is the payoff of that choice for better or worse. And then finally, we have the resolution. And the resolution can be either a little bit longer, like let's say with the original Terminator, there's a little bit of a scene where we just need to calm down from that emotional adrenaline high and, have some time to work out, what we just saw, right? And the characters kind of allow for that. Or Hitchcock preferred kind of having the crisis climax and then the resolution, was very close to that and the movie ends, right? So it just depends on the story, but these are the 5 elements of it. Number 4, every scene must turn. And what is this turn? Well, there must be a shift in value. And value, he defines, is, it could be love and hate. It could be hope and despair. It could be safety to danger, and so on, right? And so when we talk about the turn, each scene has to have a slight value shift of that. So, maybe a character starts off very hopeful and joyous, and then by the end, they're now all of a sudden depressed. And there's varying degrees. You have to do this within each of the scenes, but you want some sort of shift. Otherwise, it's a non-scene. It's just people talking, and they might be doing something physically, but it's not doing something for the story ultimately. And without a turn, you don't have drama, right? That's what I'm highlighting. You just have filler, and conflict ultimately is the engine of the story. And conflict, can come through many things. It can come from, people. It can come from nature. It can come internally, right? So there's all these different things that we could choose to have as a force of antagonism for our protagonist or multiple characters, whoever it may be. Number 5, character is choice. True character is revealed under pressure, right? A lot of times people argue of what's more important, is this character driven or is this plot driven? Well, ultimately they should be synonymous, right? Because characters drive the plot, and the things that happen within the world of the characters push the characters into action, right? It's one and the same fundamentally. And so true character is revealed through that pressure. When someone says, for example, Casablanca, and I reference it because that's a movie that Robert McKee absolutely loves. He cites it many, many times. And at the beginning, Humphrey Bogart's character named Rick, he says, I stick my neck out for nobody. And of course, he says that, but as his actions reveal throughout the movie, he does in fact stick his neck out for people, right? And so that's an example of, it's not what the character says, it's what they do that matters. And the best arcs show growth, change, or tragic downfall, right? So in the case of Casablanca, it's a growth, right? He starts off saying one thing and being kind of this curmudgeon to something else entirely by the end, and being much more, for lack of a better term, noble and things of that nature. Right? That's why the crisis climax moment is the most important and most revealing, because that's when the truest form of the character is revealed. Are they fundamentally good? Are they fundamentally bad? Things of that nature, right? We get to truly know them based on that action that is taken. And therefore, the character must take an action, right? To have a deus ex machina or other such things really hurts your story. It makes it flounders the story, because then we don't ultimately get who the character is, and it's a cheat, and we feel cheated, and so forth. Number 6, genre is a tool, not a cage. Know the expectations of your genre, right? And you can be innovative within it. You don't have to just follow the formula, but in order to do it, you have to have mastery of the genre itself, right? That's where studying the craft and knowing the various techniques and structures really helps. This is now just honing it a little bit further, because each genre has various expectations, whatever it is, right? Horror, comedy, drama, And of course, there's subgenres within all of that as well. And so if you're gonna, play with those, combine those, like a lot of people combine horror and comedy nowadays, right? All well and good as long as you understand both and can employ them both. And there's a wonderful analogy that I recently heard from the director of Death of a Unicorn, where he talks about that it literally in physics, right? You can have two different audio waves, right? And they can either cancel each other out or they can be additive. And so knowing genre, right? You can utilize that. The more you know, you can have things be additive instead of subtractive. And then number 7, the writer's rule. You're not just telling stories. You don't want anything that you do to be didactic. You're exploring the truth, and it should be a journey as opposed to just, as I said, this sermon that you're preaching to your audience. Good stories entertain, great stories resonate. So therein lies the difference, and you have a responsibility to be honest, clear, and bold. I love Robert McKee's kind of sense of what true storytellers should aspire to be. And he goes into depth about all that. So yeah, and the other thing, the big component, number 8, is to write intrinsically, meaning from the character's perspective. Remember when I talked about that plot and character are synonymous? Well, oftentimes you might remember seeing a movie or reading a book or seeing a play where you're like, wait, that doesn't make sense for that character. That feels out of character, right? Whenever we say that, it's because people aren't writing intrinsically to that character. They're just writing of like, I need this to happen, so I'm going to force this character who wouldn't normally do this to do that. Now, of course, you can force characters to do something that they don't normally do by putting them in certain situations, but it has to be true to the story and written from their perspective. So if they're going to do something out of pocket, as it were, it has to really resonate and they have to be pushed into that as opposed to just being a false action. So I love that big aspect of it, and I always try to write from the character's perspective. And that's why, for me, I like screenwriting, because whenever I do table reads, I involve actors and I can get their perspective on the character because they can start to embody it further than me as a writer. And they could be like, this doesn't ring true. Okay, cool. How do we adjust it, right? That's the beauty of all of this. So that's the big ticket item stuff. I hope that truly does help with your writing in general. But as I said, I want this to be kind of just a broader overview of all the things contained within Robert McKee's story. But, to really get all the juices, as it were, of the wisdom that he provides, you have to read the book. He also does an audiobook. The audiobook actually is also very, very good. I like to have it in tandem. Every now and then I listen to audiobook just as a fresh reminder, but I do encourage you to get the book because there are plenty of charts and graphs in there. So you need to see things visually in addition to hearing it. So there you go. Whatever questions you may have, or if you've read the book and, just your experience of it, I would love to hear in the comment section. So write them all down there. Thank you so much. I truly do appreciate you, and hope to see you next time.